Good evening, everyone. It's a lively crowd. Well, good evening and welcome to the University of St. Thomas and our annual Allbritton Art Lecture for 2025. I'm Dominic Aquila and I serve as director of the Allbritton Art Institute and professor of history here at the University of St. Thomas. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, The Radicality of Mary Cassatt. Tonight's lecture is made possible through the enduring generosity and vision of Joe and Barbara Allbritton, whose establishment of the Allbritton Art Institute has expanded and strengthened the study of art history at UST. Their commitment enables our students to engage works of art directly, both in the classroom and in the great museums of Europe and the United States. I'd like to recognize Mrs. Allbritton sitting here. We are also honored to have with us this evening our new university president, Dr. Cinda Vanderpool. We celebrate her inauguration and installation tomorrow at a wonderful Mass at the Coke Cathedral. Her presence here as president marks an important new era for the University of St. Thomas. We're also grateful to have with us Dr. Rebecca Rabineau, Director of the Menil Collection. Director Rabineau inaugurated the Allbritton Art Lecture Series at UST. Her leadership in the museum world continues to enrich Houston's cultural life. A word about the Allbritton Art Institute at the University of St. Thomas, which stands behind this event tonight. In partnership with the university, the Institute has helped us reestablish the university's baccalaureate program in art history, with most of the program's courses now linked in some way to each of the museums in Houston's museum district. The partnership with Allbritton also supports our study abroad program, enabling students to encounter major works of art firsthand. It also provides scholarships, research assistance, and a specialized art history library, which we just celebrate its opening less than an hour ago. Finally, Allbritton Art Institute at St. Thomas brings distinguished curators, scholars, and museum leaders to Houston for lectures, seminars, and public events. Through these efforts, the Institute fosters the disciplined and historically grounded study of art and connects the broader community with works that continue to shape our cultural imagination and enrich our students' lives. This evening, we welcome Dr. Kimberly Jones, curator of 19th century French paintings at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Dr. Jones is recognized internationally for her expertise in French Impressionism and the art of the later 19th century. She has curated or co-curated major exhibitions that have shaped contemporary scholarship, including Edgar Degas, A Strange New Beauty, Ingres at the Louvre, Renoir and Algeria, and the centenary exhibition devoted to Mary Cassatt, currently on view at the National Gallery. Her published works appear in leading museum catalogs and scholarly volumes, and she has played a key role in international collaborations with institutions such as the Musée d'Orsay, the Louvre, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Dr. Jones is widely admired not only for her curatorial leadership, but for her ability to draw fresh insights from artists whose reputations are often settled in the public imagination. A central contribution of her scholarship is an invitation to reconsider Cassatt beyond Cassatt's familiar association with scenes of domesticity. While those scenes form a notable part of her oeuvre, Dr. Jones demonstrates that they represent only one dimension of a painter whose discipline, ambition, and clarity of observation place her within the realist tradition. Cassatt absorbed the innovations of Impressionism, its interest in light, immediacy, and modern experience, while maintaining realist compositional precision and seriousness of purpose. We are graced to have Dr. Jones with us this evening to deepen and broaden our understanding of this remarkable American artist. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Dr. Kimberly Jones.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I am thrilled and deeply honored to have been invited to speak at the Allbritton Art Institute and to receive this invitation. It is such an honor. Among the museums I've collaborated with, which you didn't mention, is the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. I worked on 2 exhibitions with them. So this is a wonderful homecoming for me to be able to come back to Houston, a city I love so much. When I received the invitation, I was told I could speak about anything I wanted to. And, that's very dangerous. But I immediately thought of Mary Cassatt, who is an artist that I've long admired and studied. And of course, 2026 is a major year for Mary Cassatt. It is the 100th anniversary of her death. And these grand anniversary years always become an opportunity to revisit, reconsider, and recontextualize an artist. And so if you are a lover of Mary Cassatt, and I hope by the end of this evening, if you aren't, you will be, if I've done my job properly, there will be many opportunities. You can come to Washington. We are going to have a wonderful exhibition that's hopefully, fingers crossed, will still be opening on Valentine's Day of next year. Government shutdown complications excluded. There will also be an exhibition in Chicago in September. And then in October of 2026, there will be a grand international retrospective organized by the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, the National Portrait Gallery in London, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So there will be lots of opportunity to see her art and to see her celebrated on a grand stage. So, the artist's invitation, Mary Cassatt, the radicality of Mary Cassatt. Seems like a very easy topic. And then I realized I had sort of made a tactical error, because what does that mean? There's so much radicality. There's so many opportunities to explore her art and see how she changed conversations, how she upturned expectations, and really challenged conventions of her own time as a woman and as an artist. Now, this is what we know. When we think Mary Cassatt, immediately our mind goes to these images of mothers and children, these beautiful images of maternal tenderness, for which she was so rightly renowned. This really does dominate her art, although much of this art is from, as you'll see by these dates, the 1890s and beyond. It's part of her later career. And it's due in large part because there was a market for these kinds of images. She found that there was a hunger for these images, the way she was able to capture the authenticity of maternal experience, despite herself never being a mother. She had that keen observation, that skill, that understanding of human nature that she brings to the fore to these images, which have such vitality and, again, authenticity and truth. Her reputation as the premier painter of mothers and children was as well established before her death. In fact, her first biography by Achille Segal, Mary Cassatt, a painter of children and mothers, published in 1913, clearly establishes that that's who she is. She is the painter of mothers and children. Unfortunately, she becomes something of a victim of her own popularity. She is so well known for this imagery that it, in fact, has obliterated much of her other artistic production, to the point where literally people are gobsmacked to discover she did something other than these images. And that's what I find fascinating, those objects you don't know. When I first started really thinking about Cassatt, the National Gallery of Art has, in fact, I will argue, and continue to argue, the greatest collection of Cassatt in the world. The Metropolitan Museum has more works, but we have a better range. And we have 5 paintings that were shown in the Impressionist exhibitions, and the Met doesn't have any, so we win on that front. But I too was brought up. That was sort of the Cassatt I knew. And so when I started digging and finding all these other new things, it was electrifying. And it excited me tremendously. Mary Cassatt, at first glance, doesn't seem that she would be a rebel. She was born to an upper middle class family in Pittsburgh. Her father was a stockbroker. Her mother came from a banking family. She came from privilege. She came from wealth. Her brother Alexander became the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. These were the elite. These were well-established, well-to-do people. They traveled to Europe regularly. So as a young girl, she had the opportunity to visit other museums, to see art, to be exposed to culture, which is very much at the foreground of what the Allbritton Art Institute is about, giving people an opportunity to experience and engage and discover art. She learned to speak French and German, so she was very intercontinental at a very young age. She also became interested in art. At the age of 15, she enrolled in the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts to become an art student, and she was passionate about this. This was the first radicality of her life, to be a woman of her class, and to want to be an artist, and a professional artist. That was shocking. Her family was a little hesitant. They were not too keen on this idea, but they also knew there was no stopping Mary when she had her mind made up. In fact, her father said, in 3 years' time, Mame, that was the family nickname, she's going to go to Italy. She's going to want to go to travel. He was off by a year and a half, but he was right. She would, in fact, travel to Europe. She starts in Paris. At the age of 21, she moves to Paris. Her mother comes along as her chaperone, and she begins to study. At that time, as a young woman, she couldn't study in the École des Beaux-Arts, the great art school, because women were not permitted until 1893. So instead, she had to study in private studios. She studied with Jean-Léon Gérôme. She also studied with Charles Chaplin. But she found the teaching restrictive because it was limiting to what you could do. She wasn't allowed access to nude models. Women were not allowed to see nude bodies. There's a wonderful photograph, I wish I thought to put it in my PowerPoint, of a group of young artist students with a naked model. It was a cow, not a person. So what she did is she took herself to the Louvre and spent time looking at the old masters, engaging with their art. And that's really where she begins. And this is how Mary Cassatt forms herself as an artist. She looks, she studies, and she takes away her own lessons. She's not waiting for other people to tell her what to think and do. She figures it out for herself. Whoops, sorry about that. So she begins to exhibit. She shows for the first time in the Paris Salon, the premier art exhibition in the world, in 1868 with a painting of a girl with a mandolin, which is now lost. 1869, she's rejected. 1870, she shows a painting of a peasant woman from Italy, which is now lost, sadly, to us. Franco-Prussian War breaks out, she goes home, and then she comes back. And she is very fortunate that the Catholic Bishop of Pittsburgh, a man by the name of Michael Druminack, commissions her to do 2 paintings, copies after Correggio. So she goes to Parma. And Italy is this great revelation to her. While she's there, she paints this work during Carnival. And it is a painting that is very physical. This is the wonderful thing about Cassatt's women. They feel like bodies. They have weight, they have heft, they are people. It's a wonderful dynamic image. It's in a private collection, and just as sort of a temptation, this painting will be in Washington for our exhibition. It's the one loan we have lined up at the moment. So you'll get to see this painting, which is never, never on view. So if that doesn't get you to Washington, I don't know what I'm going to do. The painting passes fine, but she's beginning to become frustrated because the Paris Salon was a challenging venue. For example, in 1874, there were 3,700 works on view by 2,000 artists. How do you stand out? How do you get recognized? That was the constant challenge that she was having. And for women artists in particular, they were largely dismissed and ignored in the press. And Cassatt had her eyes set. She didn't just want to be an artist, she wanted to be a professional artist. And so she had a deal with her family, who was still, not happy about this. They would support her in terms of lodging and bed and board, but they would not pay for art supplies. They would not pay for anything to be an artist. She had to support herself. She had to be able to sell. And as an artist, in order to sell, you have to exhibit. And the Paris Salon really was the only game in town, but she kept coming up against that glass ceiling. and hitting against the jury, which was traditional and hidebound and really resistant to new ideas. And so she, in fact, will complain that, when she gets invited to the Impressionists, she joined with delight. I despise conventional art. Now, what does conventional art mean, really, when you think about it? Well, when you look at the art she's producing, it's not that, again, using that word, radical. Paintings that she does when she goes to Spain in late 1872 to 73. She goes to Madrid and Seville. And so she paints, after the bullfight, a matador, which is very much in the same mode as Edward Manet's painting of a matador, tying into sort of the current trend of Hispanismo, the sort of excitement and passion for all things Spanish, the exoticism of it. In Seville, she creates this painting of a Spanish dancer wearing a lace mantilla, which certainly owes something to works by artists like Raimondo Madrazo, who was an artist who was active in Seville in the 1870s, whose work she might have seen. So she's not necessarily stepping too far out of the box. She's still coloring within the lines. And even in something like this painting, the portrait of Eddie Cassatt, a portrait of her nephew, she tries her hand, she's trying everything to sort of figure out a way forward, figure out a way to essentially game the system, find a way to become successful. And so she does this portrait of a child in fancy dress. This is intended to become a kind of calling card to hopefully get her commissions to do portraits. It's very much in the style of artists like Carlos Duran, his Child and Dog, the kind of paintings that there was a real market for. But she's also still referring backwards, because there's also very much in the style of artists like Diego Velázquez and Anthony van Dyck, who also created these images of children in fancy dress. But what distinguishes her painting is, look at that face on Eddie. He is not happy. He is not enjoying his time as an artist model. There's something there already, this sort of, again, this authenticity of likeness, of experience that she brings to these images. She continues to sort of have this push and pull with the Paris Salon, getting accepted, getting rejected, getting ignored, and finding herself increasingly frustrated. In fact, her friend Emily Sartain says she is entirely too cutting. She is dismissive of everything, even artists like Bonnat and Cabanel, who are artists that we are meant to revere. And that's really what it is. That's the convention, these traditional artists doing the same old things over and over again. That's what's really frustrating her. And then, finally, luck strikes. She meets Edgar Degas. And Edgar Degas really admires her immediately. The story that is always said, and it's anecdotal, so hopefully take it with a grain of salt. He saw a painting of hers at the Salon, and he said, there is someone who feels as I do. That idea, it's not her talent, it's the sensibility. There's something about the way she sees the world that clicks with Degas. And so Degas, who was always trying to basically recruit new converts to the Impressionist group, sees Mary Cassatt and thinks, she's perfect. He invites her and she says, I accept it with joy. I could now be independent. I could paint as I wanted to. I despise conventional art. I can be free. And so that's sort of the moment. And the painting that really kicks it all off is this painting, the little girl in a blue armchair, the great treasure of the National Gallery, which has in recent years sort of become the most famous Mary Cassatt because we lend it so much. It's on every poster. Every time there's a Cassatt exhibition, there she is. It is a radical painting. Again, not necessarily from a 21st century perspective, but when you see what images of children look like at the time, this is how children were portrayed. They were poised, they were polite, they were quiet, well-behaved. They were good little miniature adults. None of them were particularly happy either, but... And then you see her painting. A little girl who's literally sprawled in a chair. You can see she's flopped back. She has an expression on her face, this part boredom, part petulance. You don't know necessarily what she's thinking. She's a little girl with big feelings, and Cassatt shows that. Cassatt shows her as a real, independent child with her own personality and identity. And that was so extraordinary and so unexpected. And so this painting really does kick off. And this is the painting, of course, we know Cassatt talks about it in later years. She tells her dealer, Ambrose Varlade, that the little girl is a daughter of friends of Degas, and that she painted this, and Degas found it was rejected by the jury, which really annoyed her because Degas found it good. He advised her on it, and he even worked on the background, which he actually, that little corner in the back is what, this is actually, I guess that doesn't work. So that's what he did. So minor detail, but it was a painting that meant so much to her. And just a little aside, a little sort of another private connection by Degas. That adorable little dog, that little Brussels Griffon, that is Baptiste. And he was acquired for Mary Cassatt by Edgar Degas, and he got him from his friend Ludovic Lepic, who was a printmaker, who was also a fellow impressionist. So Baptiste is the quintessential impressionist puppy, and he is here in this painting. And he's much better behaved than little girl is. So he knows his place. So this painting really then becomes the starting point. And again, we can spend lots and lots of time about the relationship of Degas and Cassatt, which I will allude to a little bit, but I don't want to go too much into depth with that. But what Degas does do that's so critical, regardless of anything else, is he gives her a platform. He gives her a place where she can finally exhibit her art, free of a jury, free of constraint, no more coloring inside the box. She can do exactly what she wants for the first time. And the doors blow off, and now she is completely liberated, and the art she does is really extraordinary. So in 1879, she makes her debut with the Impressionists at their 4th exhibition. She shows a dozen works. Already, this is a dramatic change, because at the Salon, you were limited typically, depending on the rules each year, usually you could submit 2 paintings. She can present 12 things of her own choosing. And what a range of objects she presents. This is not all of them, some of them we haven't identified. But you can see an extraordinary range of paintings, a range of pastels, different sizes, different subjects. She really is sort of exploring all avenues, but genre scenes, scenes of everyday life, and particularly, specifically, the everyday life of women becomes her focus, understandably. And one subject in particular rises to the top, and that is the theater. The woman in the theater box. Certainly, one can make the case that her interest in the theater came from her friendship with Edgar Degas, who was himself a great admirer of the theater. But she quickly distinguishes herself and separates herself from the pack in the way she approaches this. The theater, the opera, is the quintessential modern subject. It is very much a sort of a gathering place for the society. It is a place where there is a mixing of classes. Today we think of the opera as something that's for the elites and for the wealthy, but in the 19th century, it was actually still financially accessible. Not to necessarily everyday working people, but you could get a seat in the parterre, the ground floor level, for as little as 2 francs. It wasn't very expensive. It was something that the growing middle class, someone who's has a shop, this could be a special treat. It's an affordable luxury to go to the theater, where the key was not what was on the stage, but the panoply, the spectacle of the population. The seeing and being seen was very much central. Cassatt's decision to foreground the theater and the opera box in her first showing with the Impressionists makes perfect sense, because of course, in 1874, one of the great standouts was Auguste Renoir's The Loge. That was one of the paintings that everyone acknowledged was a centerpiece of that exhibition, and becomes very much sort of the image in many ways of the theater. And it is a painting that gets to everything contemporary theater was about. The luxury, the spectacle, this beautiful woman on display in her lavish dress. She's probably a courtesan, she has a powdered face. She's holding her opera glasses, but she's not looking through them. Instead, she is the object of viewership. She is on display while her male companion, isn't looking at her at all. He's watching someone else. He's gazing while she is the object of the gaze. Cassatt, however, breaks with that ideal. In this painting of In the Loge from 1878, her first theater painting, which is one of her most famous paintings, and rightly so. She shows a woman at the Théâtre Français. In fact, when it was shown in Boston in 1878, it actually was called Sketch at the Français. She is at a matinee. You notice by the way she's dressed in very somber, demure black clothing. At the opera in the evening, you wore extravagant clothing, but during the daytime performance on Sundays, you dressed a little more simply. And you see the woman, she is the gazer. She is active. She is viewing for herself and enjoying the performance. We don't know her thoughts. We can't see her face. We are not meant to be looking at her. We're meant to be thinking about what she's looking at. And then in the background, the man who's looking at her and she's not giving him the time of day. Whether she is oblivious to his attentions, whether she is disinterested or maybe willfully, ignoring him. I think any woman who's here in the audience has had that experience of having a creepy guy looking at you and do not engage, do not encourage. And that's what she's doing. This is her space. This is her experience. And she doesn't want this involvement. She doesn't want the weight of that gaze on her, so she blocks it out. And so she becomes an active figure. And so she's someone like Mary Cassatt. She's an independent, cultured woman who takes herself to the theater for her pleasure, for her own delectation, not for other people's enjoyment. She's there for her own pleasure. And that's a very empowering image that Mary Cassatt has created. And it's not just about gender, it's very much about Mary Cassatt. Think about Eva Gonzalez's painting of the box at the Italians, a painting that was rejected from the Salon of 1874, but then was later shown in 1879 at the Salon. The same year, Mary Cassatt is showing her works. Actually, the Impressionists, this push and pull, their exhibition closed the day before the Salon opened, so there'd be no direct competition. But Eva Gonzalez is still following that traditional line like Renoir. The woman on full display, holding the opera glasses, not using them, while a male companion looks on. She, again, is on display. We, as a viewer, are just hovering in this sort of weird space outside the box, which doesn't exist. So she's still maintaining that same traditional view, which again underscores how radical Cassatt's is. Among the 4 images she showed at the first Impressionist show of the theater, she also showed works in mixed media. And this is what, for me personally, I find the most exciting, and which I'm really going to be exploring for the rest of this lecture, is Mary Cassatt's engagement with materiality and the materials that she uses, how she sort of changes the game by not just working in oil, but also in other media, particularly pastel, but in this case, with pastel, gouache, which is basically opaque watercolor, and metallic paint. The choice of metallic paint is a very surprising and unexpected material. Metallic paint was not something that was sold to high artists. Rather, it was in the craft section at the colorman's shops. It was meant for things like decorating invitations and fans, things that were craft, not high art. So already Cassatt is doing something very surprising by incorporating a low material into high art. But she's also focusing on fans. And in the 1870s, there was this resurgence of interest in painted fans, that artists were creating them for the market, but also for exhibition. And many of the Impressionists created fans. Edgar Degas produced 13 different fans over the course of his career. Camille Pissarro did them, Paul Gauguin, Berthe Morisot, Edouard Manet. Everyone was doing painted fans except her. She never did a painted fan. Instead, what she does is so clever, she paints the fan in the painting. So it's a picture within a picture. Now, this use of metallics for fans is well established. It was used certainly with historic fans, but also particularly with Japanese fans. And a lot of this furia for fans came from the introduction of Japanese art that was increasingly sort of flowing into Europe in the late 1860s and 70s. But also Edgar Degas also used metallic paint in some of his fans. I'm showing you 2 of them here. Sadly, today, these metallics oxidized. They were never gold and silver, by the way, just to be clear about that. They were technical studies. Baltimore, for example, they say powdered silver. It's really brass, so it's not actually fine metals. And over time they oxidize and they lose their luster, and so they're very hard to read today unless you're looking in raking light. But what that must have been like in 1879 when the metallics were bright and clear and how they would glisten and sparkle in the light, and that impact the viewer would have in encountering them. And so just I'm showing you the two fans, and again, you can't see what's happening. The Philadelphia pastel will be in the exhibition that the Musée d'Orsay is doing, I think only in Boston, so you will have the opportunity to see that one. The other one, sadly, is a private collection, and I don't know where it is anymore. It makes me very sad. But she continues to do interesting things. Two more paintings that she shows in the 1879 exhibition, which are kind of pendants, even though they're not necessarily showing the same subject, and yet in both cases you have a woman seated, leaning back in her chair, and you have this wonderful juxtaposition of public and private, of being exposed in a more intimate space, one with the fan that's open, one with the fan that's closed. So they're meant to be a kind of sort of a pairing. But she does something else in 1879 that's really extraordinary. She exhibits them in colored frames. And so the painting from Philadelphia, they actually reframed the painting for their recent exhibition. The color is off. It's actually more of a sort of chartreuse. It's kind of a yellowish green. And sadly, this is my photograph, so you do not get the color. And on the right, unfortunately, you see my that badly photoshopped version of what the National Gallery's painting would have looked like. So one was in a green frame and one was in a red frame. And this was something, colored frames was not at all the norm. It was very controversial, very unconventional. Critics were very missed. Some said that it was ingenious, and other ones said it's incredibly ugly. I mean, there was no middle ground in all this. But again, she's pushing what people expect, what they're going to see. She also tried other media like distemper. A distemper is essentially pigment that's mixed with hot glue, and it is an incredibly difficult material to use. It dries very quickly, and you also have to maintain a constant temperature because over time, the water that's in the glue evaporates, and so the glue becomes solid and the pigment color changes, so you have to work fast. There's no take-backs. There's no reworking when you're doing distemper because it fixes so quickly. And in the 19th century, distemper was essentially only used for things like theater flats. Those great stage sets at the opera, they use distemper because it dries very quickly and it's cheap. So this, again, she's taking something that is not considered a fine art material, is not a conventional medium, and is exploring it and dealing with this wonderful matte quality you get with the glue because it dries down and gives you sort of flat, matte, non-reflective surface, very different from oil. At every turn, Cassatt picks things that are challenges, things that she hasn't done before, that are difficult, that no one else is doing because it's interesting. It challenges her as an artist, and again, allows her to push farther and farther. She does another painting in distemper, this wonderful painting of a woman holding a fan. We have, again, distemper and that metallic paint. It's a fairly large painting, and it has this very curious sort of tall horizontal, a tall vertical, like a decorative panel. So it's a very different kind of thing. And again, she only does these two paintings. Cassatt is someone who is very willing to try anything, and sometimes she likes the result and she will continue. Other times she's not, and she lets it go. She's done her say. And so this painting is a very strange work, a very unexpected. You can see sort of that mattness, sort of the flatness of the color. You can't get blending. You cannot get chiaroscuro with this because it's, again, very, very hard to manipulate. It is not a forgiving medium. There's a reason why oil painting becomes the dominant medium for painting because oil is very forgiving. Oil is very flexible. It allows you to create transparency. You can modify it and manipulate it in any way possible, and you can't here. So she literally is painting with almost one hand tied behind her back. How hard can I make it for myself and still create something beautiful? Now, if you look at this painting and you think, there's something familiar about this. Why am I thinking this? Well, because it is familiar. The fact that she does 3 paintings in 1878 with the same model, the same woman in the yellow dress holding a fan, but one is a traditional oil painting. One is a horizontal pastel with metallic paint. One is a tall vertical decorative panel in distemper. She's trying all these different things and exploring them to create this very interesting multimedia, intermedial sort of conversation in her art. And there's nothing quite like this that anyone else is doing at that time. And yet she is doing it and doing it beautifully. Now, after the close of the Fourth Impressionist exhibition, which was a huge success for the Impressionists, Edgar Degas hatches a plan, a print journal. It was going to be called Le Jour et la Nuit, all black and white, fine artist prints. And so he invites all of his friends, obviously Félix Boismond, who was a printmaker, who designed the cover decoration. Spoiler alert, this is the only thing that ever came out of the actual project, but also Camille Pissarro, Raffaelli, and Mary Cassatt. Mary Cassatt had never done a print in her life. This was a new and exciting challenge. And so she threw herself feet first into this project, creating these extraordinary prints. Her early prints are, I think, tragically understudied. They are amazing and so strange. Here we have a print she does of a costume study after Gavarni. And you see the three states and how they change. For her, these early prints, they're not commercial endeavors. These are not works made for exhibition or for sale. They are play. They are a way of learning the medium, learning its potential, its limitations, and the things you can do, and how you can basically rewrite the rules. The beauty of being an artist who is working in a medium for which you are not trained, you don't know the rules. The rules don't apply to you. There's no one saying, you can't do that, because there's no one there. So she works with Degas, who had some training that he learned from friends, but he's also fairly untrained. So it's basically the blind leading the blind. And they had a blast creating these very strange prints. Degas had a printing press, so he printed all of Cassatt's prints. And so you can see here again, the theme of a woman, the corner of the sofa. 3 iterations. Each one she's playing differently with soft ground etching. To create a soft ground etching, you have a copper plate, which you cover with a thin sort of waxy coating. You create a drawing, lay the drawing on top, and then take a stylus and you trace the drawing. When you remove the drawing, it pulls up the wax, leaving the copper plate exposed, which you then put in an acid bath. And then you can keep manipulating and manipulating over and over, adding more material, using aquatint, which is this sort of powdery resin, which gives you a nice lacy effect. You can do stop out and sort of block areas. There's all kinds of things you can do to manipulate this. And she tries everything. In many of these prints, this print, there's 3 different states. In many cases, there's only 1 or 2 impressions. They're literally, she's just trying, this works, this works, this works, move on. This, I'm gonna try this, try that. Everything is an experiment. Everything is innovative by its very design. This print, which I particularly love, Waiting. You can see in this detail how she's incising lines, this sort of speckling of the aquatint to sort of create this sort of gauzy, sort of charcoal-like quality. She's really, again, pushing the boundaries of what the medium can do to sort of see what comes out of it. It creates this wonderfully moody, evocative image. And then things like these 2 prints. What is going on here? This one on the right in particular, the standing nude. Would any of you, had you not seen that caption, thought that this is Mary Cassatt? I didn't the first time I saw it, because it seems so unlike her until you know this is how she works. And I spent a wonderful afternoon some years ago when I was working on the Degas Cassatt exhibition with a paper curator from the National Gallery and a print curator from Boston, trying to figure out how she got those effects in that nude. And we could not figure out. We thought maybe she used a brush, maybe she used basically sort of metal. It confounded us because she wasn't doing, again, the expected conventional things, always seeking out unexpected and unconventional effects, how to make something new and different. When she finally came to figure out what was she going to do for this journal, what was going to be the end result, she decided, of course, on the theater box. That had been a subject that had been so inspirational and sort of provided such fecund inspiration. And so she produces 10 prints in this window of 1879, 1880, including her only lithograph, which you see here. And she, again, returns to this theme of showing the woman in the theater box, viewed from the side. Never again, no men are ever inhabit this world. It's only women, always viewed from in profile or in distance, so you couldn't see their faces for the most part. And then she finally settles on in the opera box, and she goes through 3 iterations. The first one only exists in a single print, which I could not find a good reproduction of it. I would not show you a bad Xerox. This is number 2, the intermediary stage, in 2 different states. And then she settles on in the opera box number 3. This was going to be the print for the journal. And this was, so she spent a great deal of time, 7 different states. So a tremendous work on her part to sort of iterate and change and innovate to get to the final result that she is satisfied with. The journal never happened, as I sort of indicated. Mary Cassatt's mother, who was not a fan of Edgar Degas, put the blame fully on him. She was frustrated. She complained to her son Alexander that basically Degas pulled her into this, and she had nothing to exhibit in 1880 because she'd spent all her time doing these prints for this journal that Degas couldn't finish. Degas never finishes anything. That was her word. She was right on that point. Degas did, in fact, have issues finishing anything, but she was wrong on the fact her idea that Cassatt was wasting her time. Printmaking becomes a new avenue for her. She throws herself in with great abandon and creates extraordinary prints. It was a new medium, and she took to it like a duck to water. It really was something that she was well suited at. And I just want to show sort of how the sort of variations. She is a printmaker, but she's not working in isolation. She is truly a painter printmaker. So we have this painting from the National Gallery's collection of the Loge of 2 young girls in a theater box. We have the drawing for the print, and you'll notice it's different. There's some changes. The shape of the bouquet, the placement of the fan. The reason for that is the painting was reworked after the print. So she starts with the painting, does the drawing, does the print, and then reworks the painting. This wonderful push and pull. After doing the print, she had a new idea for the painting, and so just went back to it. She's not typically a reworker like Degas was. Degas was notorious for that, but she does it on occasion and with great intent. Another example of sort of the print painting dialogue is this painting of a young girl at a window, and then this print, Susan on the balcony. All these names, titled by the way, are sort of made up, but it's the same image of her sister-in-law seated on the balcony holding, our beloved Baptiste on her lap from her Paris window. And then, of course, the wonderful print. But the one on the right is particularly interesting because it introduces color. And color printmaking becomes the next great, sort of mountain to scale for Mary Cassatt. And she does it again and again. Here's another painting of her mother, and the print she does after incorporating color. Every time she masters something, she has to make it just that little bit harder for herself, to push herself just a little bit farther. Now by 1889, she now has her own printing press. So she can now print her own prints. She no longer needs Degas' assistant. She's completely, he stopped doing soft ground etching basically after 1879. I would argue because he saw that she did it so much better and he vacated the field. But nevertheless, you cannot argue the fact that he ceases to do soft ground etching and she continues on for many, many years. But then something else transformative happens. An exhibition of Japanese art at the École des Beaux-Arts. This was a phenomenal event, this exhibition. Nothing like this has ever been seen, I think, again. There were over 1,000 works, over 700 prints, Japanese prints, over 400 illustrated books on display. This was the greatest exhibition, arguably, of Japanese prints ever mounted in the West. Mary Cassatt went to see it, and it was love at first sight. She was just dazzled by what she saw. There's a wonderful letter that she writes to Berthe Morisot, and she's saying, we should have lunch, and we can go see the Japanese exhibition together. You must see it as soon as you can. I've seen it, and all I can do is dream of color on copper. She was so fired up by what she saw, so electrified, that it started an entirely new print campaign, a series of prints that are now known as the Set of 10. This set of prints, color prints by Mary Cassatt, is arguably one of the great print achievements of the 19th century. It is unlike anything that anyone else had ever done before. The inspiration was Japanese printmaking, particularly the works of Utamaro, who she greatly admired. The subject matter is very much tied to, similar to what she was already interested in and what she was seeing in Japanese prints, the daily lives of women. What she does, and what really is so brilliant, is she translates the Japanese woodblock print and scenes from the 17th century Japan into a Western modern vernacular. Not woodblock, copper plates, not women in kimonos, women in contemporary dress. It was a brilliant sort of idea that she had behind her, and the works are sublime. They are truly exceptional in the result. Now, Mary Cassatt was not the first artist to think about color printmaking. Many artists in the Impressionist group were already sort of circling around this idea. Color printmaking, as you can imagine, is infinitely more complicated than printmaking in black and white, where you simply have one ink. Now you have to basically navigate and choreograph multiple colors of ink. Certainly Felix Wacmont, who was by training and vocation a printmaker, a brilliant printmaker, does things like in the Zoological Garden from the 1870s, which was shown in the Fourth Impressionist show in 1879. So we know she knew this print. She knew Bracquemond. She knew his wife, Marie Bracquemond. She was also made her debut in 1879. So certainly Cassatt would have known about this. It would have been in her mind. She probably knew the works of Henri Guérard, who was also a very talented printmaker. And I just love this print, the assault on the slipper. It's hilarious. And it's actually a bit of a nod to a painting by his wife, Eva Gonzalez. You remember, we met her earlier. She did a wonderful little painting of a woman's slipper. And so here you have these little Japanese men who are essentially assaulting the slipper. So, and he does this in multiple colors. There's one in pink, there's one in yellow. So she'd been acquainted with this kind of printmaking, but she takes it to a whole nother level. Now, she loved Japanese printmaking, and she actually owned a number of Japanese prints. There were about a dozen that were sold, that went to the family. It was sold in the 1950s, but there are some, Museum of Fine Arts Boston has 5 prints that belong to her, so we know these were the prints she owned. They're faded, they've lost their color, but you can see the beautiful lines of this woman, the reflection in the mirror, that sort of wonderful quality she has, the elegance of the line. And again, an image of a woman in a domestic interior engaging in the daily, mundane actions of a typical woman. And so you see these prints, and then you see the prints she does. And it's not that much of a leap to see what she does, but how she does it. Again, these beautiful lines, I mean, just absolutely exquisite curves she brings. But how complicated, you see all these different colors. These are technically challenging. Printmaking in general is hard work. It is messy. There's lots of chemicals involved, including those acid baths and inks. It's also physically demanding. You have to put a lot of pressure to sort of get the print through. It's a very unladylike medium, quite frankly. There aren't a lot of female printmakers in the 19th century. Cassatt, however, was smart enough to know that to do this right, she needed help. So she actually brought in a professional printer, a man by the name of Modeste Leroy, who was very skilled at doing this. And in fact, you can see these prints have an inscription at the bottom, and it says it's a series of 25 impressions printed by the artist and M. Leroy, Mary Cassatt. That's an interesting thing to do because in the Western tradition, we have this idea of the painter-printmaker, the great genius who does everything. But in Japanese tradition, every step had a different studio. A different hand was involved. And so it was very much a collaborative process. The fact that she is acknowledging that collaboration is very unusual, and I think is very gracious. But these prints are brilliant. And what makes these prints so different from everything else is they were created for the market. They were intended to be sold, so they had to be perfect. And so 25 impressions of each of the 10. They were initially sold as sets, although it was hard to find a market for them. They weren't selling. Louisine Havemeyer, her good friend, bought a set that's now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Eventually, her dealer, Durand Ruel, ended up sort of selling them piecemeal, which was not ideal. Today, these prints, one of these impressions recently went in auction for $50,000 for one print. So to give you a sense of just how beloved they are, the National Gallery owns the full set, and we are inundated with loan requests constantly. And we have to keep saying no because colors fade. So they were, at the time, they were not really catching fire, but today they are recognized as being absolutely extraordinarily brilliant. And you can see that she does sort of play along the way. She plays with color, variations of color. All of this is she's hand coloring these plates. So there's going to be a little bit of variation. And so you can sort of see those variations as she sort of explores the right color relationships to get everything perfect, to register everything perfectly. Again, it's a remarkable achievement. And she even goes so far, in the case of the afternoon tea party, she adds metallic paint. She goes back to that. So the gold along the rims of the cups was hand painted in gold, or gold paint, to get that effect. So very bespoke, very carefully created. Now, the thing about materiality and trying new things is that sometimes it doesn't work. I will be perfectly honest. I hate this. I really do. But again, I wanted to show this because it again speaks to who Mary Cassatt is as an artist. It's her enthusiasm to give everything a try, at least once. This painted ceramic of a children's circle done between 1905 and 1906. Not her greatest achievement. She never does another one. I think she knew this, but still, the fact that this exists, I think, is wonderful. More successful and more fascinating, of course, is the mural. The mural of the modern woman. In 1892, in preparation for the Chicago World's Fair, there was a women's pavilion. And everyone involved in that project was a woman. The architect was a woman, and the artist was a woman. And Mary Cassatt was invited to create this mural showing modern women. The central panel shows women picking fruit, the fruit of knowledge or science. The one on the left is women chasing fame, and the one on the right is music, art, and dance. And she tells her friend Louisine Havemeyer when she first got the request to do this mural, she was very hesitant, and then Edgar Degas was very vocal about what a bad idea it was, and she said, it got my spirit up, and I would not give it up for anything. So spite is a wonderful motivator for Mary Cassatt, and it's wonderful that she did this. This mural was almost 60 feet wide by 14 feet high. This is enormous. She'd never done a mural before. This was completely out of her wheelhouse, and yet, once again, she throws herself in with such gusto and enthusiasm. Sadly, the mural is lost to us today. When, after the fair, the building came down, the building no longer exists. The mural was in the possession of Bertha Potter Palmer by 1911. By 1918, it had disappeared. The dream is someday someone will find in some dusty attic a painting rolled up. Probably not, but so we only know it from these photographs. But again, once again, here's an artist who accepted every challenge, who was thrilled by the possibility of doing new things, things that people had done, particularly things that people told her she couldn't do. She was always inspired to be as inventive and unconventional and radical as she became. And I think that's the great legacy that Mary Cassatt leaves behind. It isn't necessarily the mural, but it's that inspiration, that sort of that life that she modeled for us, that we can all learn from and be inspired by. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones has agreed to have some questions, and I think there's someone who'll have a microphone. If not, then just speak your question loudly.
might not seem to be the one, given my materiality, the little girl in the blue armchair. And I think partly because I've lived with too long, but when I started working on that exhibition, I worked very closely with a conservator. I'm very lucky in that regard, because the question was, what did Degas do? We have the smoking gun, the letter she says, Degas worked on the background. And so we spent so much time looking at that painting to try to understand, and really understanding that relationship, understanding who she was. It became such a revelation. And I'd always loved the painting. It was beautiful, but realizing sort of the subtlety of her radicality in that work. I mean, again, it's not as, such a daring thing like the print, the set of 10. It's a quietly subversive work, and a work that really, the longer you look at it, the more you understand just how groundbreaking it really is. Yes? You could see women, but you couldn't study nude figures in the art studio. They were everything had rules, but she could look in the mirror, could see her naked body, and she could hire models, certainly, and she did. She didn't use professional models for the most part, but she used friends. So yeah, but you never see any naked men in her art.
Hi, thank you. So I really appreciated your focus on like the lives of women in private, but I noticed that they're not paintings of women eating breakfast. Most of the paintings seem to me women preparing to go and preparing to be looked at. So I was wondering if there's something there, like it's almost like the men who are going to gaze upon them later are off stage, and is there something there about that particular, like there's a lot of mirrors and there's a lot of dressing. There's something going on there.
Well, we're assuming that she's going places that men are going to be, because there are paintings of afternoon tea, and so paintings of women who are going to visit other women. So it's, again, the assumption has always historically been the audience is male. Things are, works of art traditionally have been by men, for men, about men. And so we even bring that. We think, oh, she must be preparing for, but what if she isn't preparing to go out to visit men? What if she's going out to spend time with other women? And the men are just inconsequential. They're just there. I mean, there's no escaping them entirely. So, so even, but I mean, she's aware of that audience. I mean, she's living in the world. She's going out, she's going to the theater, but she also knew there were places as women she couldn't go. She couldn't go to cafes. So that was something, and even though she is very bold and independent, one of her, a young artist friend of hers later said she's always the very conventional, proper Pennsylvania lady. There's always a little bit of that, well-behaved woman. She's radical in her art, but not in her life, I think is probably what it comes down to.
Thank you.
Yes?
Was she close to her boyfriend?
They knew each other. How close they were is hard to tell. There is correspondence, but it's not a lot. I mean, unfortunately, Mary Cassatt destroyed a lot of her correspondence, so we don't know a lot of the details. But again, I mean, that letter, that fact she's saying, you must come and we must go to see the Japanese together, certainly speaks to at least a very warm professional relationship. And they all moved in the same social circles. So, I mean, they all went to each other's, the Cassatt family had their salon, and Degas did, and the Manets and the Moores. So, they're all the same that group is all the same social class, they all intermingle. So I think she was close, but I don't think they were like BFF girlfriends. Yes?
Can you take us back to when you first encountered her and what caught your eye and why you became interested in studying her?
Well, it's interesting because for a long time I wasn't interested in Mary Cassatt because I knew the mothers and children, and they just didn't speak to me. I mean, I'm a single woman, I don't have children, and they're nice, they were nice paintings, but they never really engaged me. But seeing her, at one point we were reinstalling the galleries at the National Gallery, and for a long time we had all the Cassatts and the Renoirs in one gallery, and then we had to move some things around, and I started putting Cassatt with Degas, and I'm like, it's interesting, when I see them side by side, that's kind of interesting. And so I spent more time, and then of course I started spending time looking at the works on paper, and the prints just blew my mind. because they're not the things you see in the books. I mean, as art historians, as curators, we have a duty to expand people's understanding and their minds. And so they're like, why are we not talking about this? Why do we keep putting her in that box? And so once I saw those other things, the more I studied her, the more interest came. And those images of mothers and children that I hadn't really responded to, now that I had a better context, now that I understood where they were coming from, I could see the subtleties. I could see those interesting elements. And they became so much more interesting when I knew how she got from point A to point B. Having that storyline filled in really gave me a context to really sort of respond to her more fully.
I have a question. Is her artwork still exhibited in the color frameworks, frames that she used to put?
No, sadly they're not. Philadelphia, I think, is planning to keep their frame, but no, because it's very odd. And you know, for example, seeing the Philadelphia painting in the exhibition last year was very strange. Sort of seeing it stands out. It's jarring. And so it's interesting as sort of a one-off at that moment, but it would be hard hanging it out because it takes away, it's distracting. So, but it's nice to know that existed, and that was something, and that was a choice she made. And she probably knew it was going to be a pretty controversial choice, and she did it anyway because that's who Mary Cassatt was.
One more question, and then we have a reception outside. Plenty of time for more conversation.
No, I wanted to ask you something because I was very impressed by this relationship, like friendship relationship at with the Gap. This thing, I'm thinking about certain important paintings of the Gap, right? The absentee drinkers or the night of literature. He was kind of denouncing, was very interested, correct me if I'm wrong, in denouncing also the isolation of society, sometimes the sadness of that kind of the industrial revolution brought into society in Paris, in the cities, right? Was she interested in his this kind of ideas too? Was she influenced and impacted by these important ideas that the Impressionists wanted to convey?
I don't think.
It seems so.
No, I don't think it was because I think in some ways because there were places that she could not go, she was sort of insulated from a lot of that. I mean, she came from privilege, she came from wealth, and she never, she never went without. I mean, she had a very luxurious life her entire life. And so I don't think she really experienced that in the way that Degas did, because Degas was out and about in a way that she wasn't. And so it wasn't something that she necessarily witnessed personally. And instead, I think what she was much more interested in was actually the condition of women. And she was a very vocal supporter of the suffrage movement. And really wanted, in fact, she actually had, in 1915, Louisine Havemeyer organized an exhibition in New York to raise funds for the suffrage movement. And so she exhibited the works by Cassatt and Degas in that exhibition. And Cassatt's family boycotted the show. Her sisters-in-law did not go. And she was so outraged that her sisters-in-law were not only disinterested, but actually actively working against women getting suffrage, that all the paintings that she planned to give to them, she sold because she was so outraged. So I don't think she cared about sort of the general situation, but I think she cared deeply about women's rights. And I think that was her one great passion that she never left behind.
Please join us for a reception in the lobby, and we can have more conversation with Dr. Jones.
Oh, thank you.